morning, y'all. As everyone gets connected to audio, we're so happy that you all are joining us for the final webinar of the new counselor webinar series. We did it, y'all. We made it to May. We're getting there to graduation, whenever that happens for you all. Here in Hawaii, we have, well, at my school, we have about 3 more weeks, so we'll get there, but hopefully y'all are a little bit earlier than us. But yes, we're so excited. We have an exciting webinar planned for you folks where we are going to be actually chatting with Eva Blanco Masias from Santa Clara. She is the Vice President for Enrollment Management at Santa Clara. So thank you so much, Eva, for being here with us. And so just a little bit of housekeeping for everyone. We have some questions prepped for Eva just to kind of go through a few different topics that the faculty had kind of wondered about. We will also have time for Q&A as well from the audience members. So once that happens, just like unmute yourself or you can put your question in the chat box. We will all be kind of monitoring that. And then if we have time, we'll also just do a little bit of breakout rooms where we're just going to do some reflection, no stress role play or anything like that. It really is just to kind of get together and chat. But yes, Eva, can you just briefly give us an intro to you, who you are?
Sure, and hi everyone. It's good to be here with you. Thanks for the invitation. A little bit about myself. So Eva Blanco Masias, Vice President for Enrollment Management here at Santa Clara University. I've been here for 20 years, actually, this past January. But just in this role at the beginning of the pandemic, which was really exciting times to start this role. And certainly filling really big shoes. But then, of course, as you all know, there was just a whole lot of new things we were dealing with. But prior to being in admissions, and I started in admissions when I first got started here at Santa Clara as a transfer counselor. So I was responsible for transfer admissions and a little bit of international admissions in addition to just, regional first year admissions as well. But this was a second career for me. I came from, prior to that, I was actually in the media and entertainment industry. And I know it seems a little odd and maybe non-related, but I actually learned a great deal in the industry. I got into it because, I wanted, for me, the social cause was wanting to change and increase representation of underrepresented voices and stories in media, which is why I got into it. I'm originally from Los Angeles. So that took me from, I had gone to school on the East Coast. I went to Yale, decided to come back to LA and try this area. Well, what I learned very quickly was that I kind of felt like a jack of all trades and master of none, but at that time I was actually doing quite a bit of recruiting and I was doing talent scouting, going to things like, comedy shows and book readings and that sort of thing, really trying to find these sort of new voices. That then took me, there was the industry of the cable networks into Latin America then started launching out of Miami, and that took me to Miami. And all in this process, I was learning a whole lot of little of everything, always in this kind of entrepreneurial space, but also learning marketing, technology. That then took me from the cable industry, it then took me to the internet when the internet was first launching into Latin America. But I felt like things were moving very quickly and I felt like I'd gotten a little bit off course. Whereas my original intent, now I was in this kind of business industry going into Latin America, and I sort of had to stop and say, okay, what am I doing? In the end, I'm bringing entertainment options to the wealthy population of Latin America. That's a little bit off where I was trying to go. So I decided to then take a step back. The real jolt for me was September 11th, because I was in New York when that happened, just blocks away from the ground zero, for a friend's wedding. And it just really got me to think about what I wanted to do in life. And I'm sorry, you're bringing me back to a little moment that, was a little tough. But, at that moment I said, I have to do something that's meaningful to me, that matters, that is purposeful. So that's when I decided to then one, get back to California, because California just was home. I wanted to be close to family, but there's just a lot more about, the diversity, the arts are really important to me, the cultures that are just so available. And then of course, the social political issues that, are important to me as well. And so I decided to come back to California. I landed in the Bay Area. And I decided to start taking a look at different jobs. And one of the sectors I was looking at was education, because for me, the college going process was one that wasn't direct, right? It was very circuitous. And the fact that I ended up at Yale had a lot to do with who I met along the way, the information I got along the way. It could have been me. It was me. Luckily, I feel like I ended up in a good place that was a good fit, but I got there without ever visiting, without having met anyone who had gone before me. That's not true. I did meet some folks who went there before me. That's actually in large part how I got there, but just how it mattered, right? That information, access to information and resources. And so that was one of the reasons why I chose this industry. And I got here at Santa Clara at a time when that particular year, it actually didn't make its enrollment. And it created an opportunity for me to, one, bring in a lot of the things that I had learned previously in another sector, but things like marketing, technology, et cetera, that then, and really trying to bring in these new ideas at a university that actually fit really well with me and my values. I think I just got really lucky that I landed at a place that was values-based education. And, mind you, I didn't know a whole lot about Santa Clara. I'd heard the name, but I didn't know a whole lot about Santa Clara or the Jesuits until I got here. And it's just been a really great fit, because at the core of what we do here is really revolving around this mission that to me is very sort of justice rooted. And it's a framework that in and of itself really brings in a lot of these things and values that I feel strongly about. So I feel like I've been able to really give in a way that, gosh, makes this job so fulfilling, and yes, extremely challenging. You all know what we're dealing with in terms of, this landscape, but in the end, to try to really uphold and live up to the promise that we are making to students. And even when as an institution, we all have room for improvement and, sort of breaking down the barriers and the silos that we exist in. But that mission really centers that purpose for me and makes it, it just makes my work a lot more meaningful to bring in other folks in admissions. And I oversee admissions now, financial aid, and the one-stop enrollment center to kind of really work towards advancing this mission has been, again, very meaningful to me. And I just feel really lucky that I've landed at a place where I've been able to grow, because that's not always true for a lot of folks. And I've really been able to grow and ultimately now land in this role that, although very challenging, a time that's very challenging, it's also, as you know, we're dealing with a lot of headwinds that make a lot, that will make a lot of difference for those who have this opportunity to have access to higher education and those who don't. So I'm kind of up for the challenge, and I'm happy to be here.
That's awesome, Eva. Thank you so much for sharing. I didn't know all these aspects, and you've been our rep or someone that has known Hawaii for so long. And now I'm like, oh, this is great trivia for future Hack conferences and everything. I love it. And we also appreciate as the faculty, just your commitment to these values of equity and justice, especially the talking point of access, because as we all know as counselors, right, that is a big piece in this college admissions process, but college going culture. And so it's perfect because it's a great segue to some of our questions, because we do have some questions on some big things coming up. And so first, we actually kind of wanted to chat about some of the upcoming changes or not as we go through COVID pandemic, life as is. And so one of the big things that did come up as a result of the pandemic, right, was the test optional movement, which we appreciate. It can be a little tricky though, because as we advise families and how they feel about test optional, it can be very confusing. But we were wondering, do you folks see any upcoming changes or shifts in regards to test optional policies for colleges?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I think if we think about pre-pandemic and even back then, there were several schools that were moving test optional for different reasons, primarily to make application or students make the college going process more accessible. We know there's a lot of studies around the SAT and how it creates barriers for certain students. And so there was already this movement, but as with, I think a lot of institutions, there's always the fear factor of like, what happens once you change and you can't go back, or what effect that'll have to enrollment. We depend heavily on what has happened in prior years and data and statistics. And so that was a big fear factor, where there's nothing like a crisis and a pandemic that then forces you to go there kind of all at once. And so to me, it's a little bit of like, it's the genie out of the bottle. It's going to be hard to bring it back. And I think it's been a good thing overall in terms of, we've been forced to, all institutions, to sort of what happens when this piece of information is no longer available. And we're still here. A lot of us have experienced, some more than others, a big increase and swell in applications. So that's perhaps some of the effects that we're also seeing, and maybe on the negative side, right? Well, we think about going test optional. It's a piece of information that maybe has had a lot of, embedded bias and is now eliminated. But in increasing the applications, it's created still a competitive and intensifying the competitiveness of the applicant pools. Some schools that maybe are now studying that and have more information the last 2 years to see the effects of that, and will make decisions where they will continue to require it. I think, MIT was one of the first to do that. And that might serve them well in terms of the data and the analytics that they're reviewing. Maybe they won't see an impact in the access they're able to provide and or their applicant pools. But I see it and I welcome it, right? Because we certainly have seen students apply that maybe otherwise. And, to be quite honest, a lot of these students have actually been very qualified. It's just this fear factor that they've all had around this test, So I'm all for removing these barriers and let us, sort of take a look. It has increased our applicant pools a bit, not again to the same degree, but I think that that's also naturally happening, as we saw from the Common App data that's come out, that more students are applying to more schools as well. But I think that I don't think a whole lot of schools are rushing to go back to administering the test. As you know, even the College Board is going through a lot of change that, time will tell on where they land, but it's given us an opportunity, I think, to really hold true to holistic review, perhaps look at other ways to engage and understand students and the information they're providing to then, make decisions. But I don't expect that the test optional policy will be eliminated. But you are right, there is confusion because we all use it very differently, right? So whether we use the test, not the test, or how we do that. So I think that will just become much more incumbent still on both students, counselors, schools to just understand how schools are using it and whether they have whether they want to submit, because that really is their agency, right, is to decide whether it makes sense for them to do so or not. An interesting trend we saw is that we actually saw a decline of students who actually submitted their test scores this year versus prior years. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But we really truly believe that we need to give students that choice to decide how they can put their best foot forward on their terms, and if that helps with a test, great. If they don't want to, and that's not how they want to present themselves, that's okay. I think we have enough in the application that tells us so much more about a student besides just a test. So that we'll continue to operate that way.
I think we all need to maybe take this part of the test optional section and maybe have it for our fall sessions with our parents and our families, because that is something that we do get a lot as counselors. And so thanks so much for kind of reaffirming what we are saying to our families as well. And before our start of this webinar, we kind of had chatted about virtual programming, and it is a way to make visits or gathering information for families a little bit more accessible, especially as some folks may still not be able to get to campus, right? I know that kind of where we're at in life, where the pandemic has kind of shifted, and then there might be maybe a worry or a concern that virtual programming or other ways to make these kinds of learning about colleges accessible go away. How do you feel like colleges will actually make this process continually to be more equitable, right? Like in regards to families that maybe can't get to campus still?
Here again, I think that having virtual options to get to know a campus has been a really good thing, and has sort of broken these barriers to having to make these expenses to travel to schools. It's really forced us as institutions to become more accessible virtually, and has allowed for students and families to adopt, all of us to adopt to technology, which is really the barrier or the challenge, right? Like you can have a presence, but if no one's really using it, but now it's become kind of commonplace. So we know we have to be present, and that is going to be for many students the only way. In fact, we saw applications come to us from places we've never traveled before. That's true internationally, domestically. And so as more students are able to access this information, I think it's great. And so we know we have to be there. Things like virtual tours, information sessions online at any part of the cycle, in the beginning, while they're making the decision, even afterwards, right, as a way to continue to engage. The webinars, I think, we're now starting to also see like they're to be able to offer them in multiple languages, right? So that we're also engaging the families. I think they're just all really wonderful resources. Different institutions are also bringing into these conversations different parts of the campus, whether it be professors or programs, where again, it's more depth and more variety. So that's all a really great thing if we're able to minimize the cost, especially for those students who don't have those resources or the time, right? Families are very busy. But we also want to be in person. And so that's a challenge we're dealing with now. How can we be in these different places at the same time? Because the resource we don't have and can't make more of is time and that bandwidth, right? So that this summer, I think several institutions will have that exercise of really determining where we will be in person and online. But students should really use these resources to their full potential. And more, I think that's kind of the exciting thing as well, because as students, one day one technology or platform is fun and where they all are, and then the next year it's not popular anymore. So we're trying to keep up with that, as well as understand what platforms will make again our information more accessible. And I think the part that has been really cool too is to, as you can go on a website, but until you get onto a campus, sometimes you just can't always feel the energy or the, just the campus feel and the layout. And with now the variations of virtual tours, or students and influencers also being able to go around campus, have conversations with other friends, there's more of the campus life that's coming through in these platforms, whereas pre-pandemic that wasn't as true. And that's just as important, that students feel that they can connect and be a part of a community, and that's sometimes some of this the look and feel from just the campus community. So that's been, I think, a fun addition to the virtual offerings.
And I know we also kind of talked about the wonderful month of May as we close out our years, right? And so for us, we're really trying to work with our juniors, but also with our seniors, and make sure that they're ready for their next home, right, as they leave our campuses. And you all are finishing up creating your class. but also preparing for next year when the freshmen arrive to your campuses. And so we were actually wondering, just given what we've seen in regards to like changes to students' mental health and well-being, in regards to like some of the skill sets that maybe they don't have as much of perhaps because of the pandemic and how that affected their learning dynamic. So what do you feel, or how do you feel that colleges are kind of changing or adjusting to help provide resources for our students, especially as they're different as from generations before?
Yeah, no, we are definitely responding to the various needs, and we certainly have seen that. I think the pandemic effect will be there for a long time, and I think where we've seen it first has certainly been in the well-being, mental health, and well-being is a priority. And the way that we've responded to it, I think a lot of campuses have also is like, how can we be much more present and provide more services that students are seeking? So we've also brought counselors into the residence halls as well so that they could be there at different times. And we've also prepared our campus in different capacities, even if it's like a place where there's just a transaction taking place or a form being submitted, that we're able to be much more vigilant and present for students. We're lucky to be able to do that. Again, we often refer to ourselves as a community. We're not a huge campus, so it's important that we take care and consider those signs sometimes of students who really need somebody to just sit down and talk to at that moment in time, or just where we can refer them to where they can be best supported. So I think across the board, campuses have been responding to their mental well-being and resources for that. It's a challenge because that need is everywhere in our schools, from elementary school to college and everywhere. So there's a big demand for that kind of expertise, but we're certainly doing our best to do that both in person and also here provide even some remote and virtual services if that's more comfortable for students as well. Aside from that, and some of the other sort of challenges and or gaps that we're seeing, some students saw this interruption in their classes. So math is probably the area where we're seeing it the most. Because folks just had different exposure, and already curricula is very different from school to school, but they absorb the information in different ways, and some of them were very comfortable and others were not able to do this virtually if that was the only mode of being able to be in a classroom. So we've had to expand on that resource as well and be able to provide more sections in addition to that, more sort of tutoring opportunities and or support, peer support as well, office hours, that sort of thing. So we really are, again, trying to understand what are these needs that students have and respond to them. Those are just two areas, but that of course, and every school will respond to it very differently based on both their resources, the kind of campus they are, what kind of different offices and or departments can provide support. But there we certainly have seen it. We've adjusted even how we maybe more information that we seek from students to make better decisions about housing, where they get placed, their roommates, who they're going to be compatible with. We've expanded also just our services for those who have just special needs and need more time and or need more accessible access to housing, classrooms, etc. So we realize that students are not only because of the pandemic, but in general just being much more attuned to the needs that students have, because they need and deserve to be in a place where they can be successful, and that includes us being able to provide these support services to them.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing it. I think it helps us to feel a little bit more secure as we send our seniors out to a bunch of different places in the fall, but especially because they're navigating a big change once again, right, after senior year. We were also really curious about the admissions process and kind of all the changes that we've seen on our side as the college counselors. And so we wanted to maybe get your opinion on a few topics. On our side, we've actually seen, especially just depending on the school institution, right, an increase in deferrals, but also waitlist decisions, maybe perhaps more this year or the past year than years past. And so we were kind of wondering what your take, and maybe you've had conversations with your colleagues, but how do you see the role of waitlist kind of evolving in admissions in these current cycles?
Yeah, don't underestimate the power of wait lists. I'll just say, as long as I've been here, and again, I've been here for a long time, most years than not, we've had some wait list activity. But I think in the last 3 years, what's absolutely true is that it's become a lot more unpredictable. We talked about test scores. Test scores used to be part of the review process. Those are now gone. And, and students, I think, are also, behavior is changing, right? They're trying to decide, is college a good choice for me now? Is college affordable for me? Is all these big decisions. And so, and applying potentially to more schools. So that's will introduce kind of this, the uncertainty into colleges being able to enroll their classes. What we saw at Santa Clara for the last 3 years is that, of course, the year of the pandemic, we actually saw a little bit of a dip. There were students who just said, I'm going to wait for a number of reasons. Financially, I'm not ready for it. I don't want to be virtual. I'm going to wait. So as we go into then the following year to enroll a class, you plan for it. And then what turns out isn't always exactly as you planned. And what we saw in that first year was actually a little bit higher, a larger enrolled class. And we're fine because, we had some capacity from the year prior because we had a decrease. Mm-hmm. The following year, we were expecting about the same, maybe things are settled up a bit, but it turns out that we over enrolled again. By twice as many from the prior years. So, it begins to become a bit of a snowball effect. And we, of course, are very concerned about making sure that the experience for students who are here is one that they, that is a positive one, that is with the support and the resources that they expect, that they need. And so this year, our plan is that we couldn't over enroll, right, for housing purposes, for a number of different reasons. So we played it a lot more conservative this year. And that might have been true for other schools who maybe saw that same kind of pattern. And so we went into this expecting that we would have to build the class so that then we can get to that point. And so that's where we are. And we have had quite a bit of waitlist activity. And, I think the message to students is, again, like that waitlist offer could very well turn into an admission offer. So continue to engage, and schools will have a different way that they receive and communicate that information. So in our case, we actually don't mind that students reach out to us and say, hey, I'm still interested. If we can make that happen, we like to. There's other schools that say, don't send anything else. We don't want anything else. But so continue for those students who are still interested in coming off the wait list. I think that until you get a communication that it's done and over with, it could be a real possibility. So that's where we are now. But you never know, right? In enrollment, things change so quickly. That schools nevertheless want to make sure that they can bring in their classes. And so, if that wait list is still active, then I would just treat it as such. But I think I look back on the years when we've been able to do that and pull some students off the wait list, and wow, are they great students? I think those waitlisted students are still really great. They're great students. It's not a no. It's you're good. We just give us a little bit of time and let's try to figure out this capacity thing. But just great students.
Awesome. Thank you. One of the other hot topics I'm sure you heard about in this upcoming year and this last year is the evolving role of ChatGPT and its marvelous capacities to create all kinds of different types of writing. And so we were wondering, as an institution, what has Santa Clara, what are you folks planning in regards to what that role could be, or even if you've chatted with your colleagues as well, but what do you expect, the response to be in regards to ChatGPT in the admissions process?
Yeah, I think that as I think about the potential of not just ChatGPT, but all the variations of, right, all these AI platforms. And if I think about it too much, it gets a little scary. So, but I think where we've heard it more in terms of the admission process has been one in, okay, well, will students then utilizing it to, complete their essays, and how will you be able to tell? And I'm not so sure that we will, but what will be true, I think, is when we think about this essay, in the end, we're still trying to not necessarily, identify an award-winning essay and, perfectly written essay, but it's really the essence of that student. And so however they then communicate. So, or at least, I don't know if ChatGPT is necessarily going to be able to identify that and write that more clearly than a student themselves, right? They're going to still know themselves best and communicate best, again, sort of both the tone, the essence of who they are. So, and hopefully, students who, we're in the business of also trying to find those students who want to make a difference, who are ethical folks. So hopefully they start, sort of exercising that in this process as well. And that comes through, right? So we'll continue to emphasize that as well. In the end, we want to see authenticity. And authenticity is coming directly from students. So we hope that students will really carry that message and take it to heart. The other area where I've heard about it now kind of, coming up as possibilities, and I think just a couple of days ago, there was an article, I don't know if it was Inside Higher Ed or the Chronicle, of how they might be using it in admissions. I think there could be variations of ways that could be, and that, but I think where folks might start to kind of experiment is really more so on the transfer side of things, and I can even see that of interest and of value for us, in particular on the transferability of credits. That's for transfer students, that's a big deal. Like which ones of my courses will transfer? How many credits will I have? Does that put me at first year, second year position, costs associated, et cetera. So if we can get to a point, that's been a really challenging thing for schools to be able to, bring in a technology and or databases and infrastructure to be able to support that, because every school is very different. So there's not a one size fits all. So maybe there's a solution here. And I think some schools are starting to explore and experiment with that. And that could be a good thing, because as I think even here we are wanting to expand our offerings for transfer students as well. The pandemic and just other barriers, have really make transfer to community college, from community colleges or other colleges to then another four-year institution, really the most viable choice. So if we can simplify that process, which isn't easy for students to then articulate their courses, I think that could be a good thing.
That's really interesting to hear, because I think from the counseling side, we are kind of looking at it in the writing aspect, but that's amazing to see, because that could potentially definitely provide access points for other students. And I saw that they had kind of mentioned something about actual evaluation of transcripts, which might be nice for you folks. I could imagine just all of the schools that are sending their data to you all. Thank you so much, Eva. One of the other things that we've kind of talked about amongst ourselves, and I think this is both in higher ed, K-12, the country as a whole, I think we're all waiting to see what happens in regards to the Supreme Court ruling on race-conscious admissions. And we know that that's probably going to be coming out very soon, as we roll into summer. And so I know it's different institution to institution, but I'm sure, within Santa Clara, but also just your field as a whole, how have those conversations been? What are their plans? What do the plans look like, depending on what the ruling says in regards to race-conscious admissions?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for now, there's been just a lot of, the conversations are very speculative, right? I think we all, just based on the makeup of the Supreme Court, expect some level of restriction from what we know it now. I think at least that's the expectation, but who knows, right? But the question really is about where this decision will impact. Right now, we think of it in terms of just admissions and utilizing it in the admission process, and that's perhaps a more narrow scope of where this ruling may land. but it can be broader than that. And this also has implications for not just undergrad, but grad, studies as well. So we're waiting to see. And so there's going to be both we expect in admissions that there will be a direct impact to how we do our work, right? If there's anything we can refer back to, there's, was a proposition here in California that, prohibited use of race at the Cal State and UC level. And so, we've learned how they've been able to do that. And so that's, where we might find some indication of where this could go. But if it has broader implications in other areas and in the recruiting side, and that means different things. And so we all have to think about how we're going to do our work. What I find a bit of some level of light and hope. One is that I think in most parts of the country, and certainly here where we are in California, and other parts, people want and value diversity, lived experiences that you can't disaggregate from race. And so, looking ahead, I think that gives me hope, in addition to the fact that I'm at an institution that where lived experiences and diversity is embedded in our, and the DEI work is embedded in our mission. You can't, it's a framework that is rooted in social justice, right? That so it gives me hope that, okay, this will affect how we do our work, but not that we have to do this, that there's a purpose and there's meaning, and we have to continue to advance towards equity and social justice. And we know, we just know statistically and historically that we could do better, and that we could be rising up communities that have been underserved. And that's what we do as an institution, as a Jesuit institution. There's a social responsibility to why we exist. So we may have to figure out and spend some time and look for ways and friends and partnerships that, where we can do this in a legal fashion. But we'll continue to search for being able to do that for our world.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Eva. I know it's a big decision that comes down, and there's a lot of implications. And like you said, it can be maybe in the world of admissions, but it has quite wide-ranging potential impact. And so we're eager to see how whatever decision comes down, how we can work together to increase and always, look towards equity and access. But thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. One of our last faculty questions, and then we'll definitely open up to the audience, because I know you probably are thinking of all the things, but we had a question on rising costs of college, right? That is a big topic, I think, in the past few years. Maybe it's one of those age-old questions, but in regards to kind of that rise in college cost, what have been those conversations on the college level? How do colleges kind of plan forward for that?
Yeah, it's a constant conversation. I think it has existed for many, many years, and it will continue, especially as, we see the price tag rise at colleges. And that's also just because the cost of universities operating continues to rise, right? Everything from inflation to making sure we can offer faculty and staff living wages that, we're probably in a place where that's even, more challenging because of just the cost of living. So it's a big challenge, but we can't continue to just, expect our students to be able to pay for that price tag, especially when you look at the changing demographics and more students. That the populations that will be growing are also ones that come from communities that have social lower socioeconomic levels. And again, we're in an institution that in its mission is wanting to provide greater access to students of all backgrounds. So we continue to just, again, try to look for ways where we can make this affordable. And I think schools are trying to do the same, certainly from ways we fundraise to trying to increase, again, sort of how we, the funding available for financial aid to be able to cover the cost for those students who can't pay the entire cost. And I think that we're also looking for ways, again, I mentioned transfers, for example. Transfers hadn't been a huge part of our population. And I think, again, as we look for at all the signs and the signals of why students are going to other forms of education and or what pathways, a lot of it is because of cost. So where can we also be much more both strategic and meet students where they are? So we're exploring strengthening some of our pathways with our community colleges here in the surrounding area and others, so that, and communicating that so that students know how to make their way. We created a new scholarship for transfer students, in fact, and forming these partnerships with sponsors. A lot of the corporations that are here in Silicon Valley are looking for, again, sort of the workforce pipelines as well. So we're trying to find ways in which we can resource and find these resources for students so that we can prepare them and give them access and opportunities, not just to education, but everything that comes from thereafter, from building their social networks, their capital, social capital, professional networks, etc. But we need to continue to do that. That also goes hand in hand with working with our government officials at the state level, at the federal level, because what hasn't improved there is also, there's been a big campaign for the last several years of doubling the Pell. We need to double, triple the Pell. We really need to be able to support, again, create access to education. I mean, every student really, I know that firsthand, and it's made all the difference, not just in my life, but in the generations to come beyond, because I got an education. So that drives me to try to do things better. One of the things that, individual universities also looking at their own policies to see how they can improve that. One of the things that we've done this year is that, we know that we can't necessarily not increase tuition, but when we do, for those students who are a lower income, we're sensitive to that. So we are indexing our tuition increases to make sure that they don't see any increase in their costs, at least while they're with us. So, but we're always looking for ways to try to cut down on those costs, especially for those families who are lower middle income families, that where it's costly. We do know that, the economy has also been really great for a lot of families, and so that's great there too, but we want to, again, sort of be able to amplify these pathways for those who especially are first in their families and need some support financially.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eva. We appreciate that. And as always, your commitment and your institution's commitment to equity and justice, but also especially access for all of our families. And so we have made it through the official faculty portion, but we know that folks probably have a lot of different questions, maybe sparked from, things that we've talked about earlier in the conversation. But since we have Eva here, because we know she's a busy person, we definitely want to allow space for folks. So if you would like to unmute yourself, or yes, please use the chat. We can pull your question from there as well. But yeah, opening the floor to anyone and everyone. And don't be shy. While we wait, I did have a quick question, Eva, because, the question on race conscious admissions kind of sparked my follow-up questions in my head. And so as institutions, once that Supreme Court ruling hits in the summer sometime, I know that institutions will be like, okay, we've got plan A, B, C, depending on what exactly this entails. Do you think colleges will let us know, the college counseling counterparts, how you all are going to do the work or how we can partner and support you as well. I know that it potentially can impact our work on our side, but we definitely
Yeah.
want to, yeah, help.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, until we know more, I think we'll have questions that would be really helpful to um, engage in conversation to find those ways of still supporting our students. So I think we all want to see that. And you know, counselors have always been great partners for us to better understand what the issues and concerns families and students are dealing with. So I think that will continue. Again, we just really need to understand this ruling first and foremost to make sure, again, that we're just operating within the legal bounds. But from there, I think it really is about getting creative and connecting as you know, as friends and colleagues. And I think that that's true outside of even just you know, college advising and the higher ed space, because you know, we're tributaries to society. And so this affects really our society and the world as we know it. So for those of us concerned about the ramifications and the impact, yeah, we need to come together to come up with some great solutions.
Okay, great. And then, sorry, one more quick question. From the admission side, have you folks noticed any new trends or any new pieces of info from, you know, this cycle that we just went through?
That's a good question. There's always something. It's like, oh, that's different. um, you know, I think we're still kind of getting our bearings straight from coming out of the tunnel, but I think that students are being very, very thoughtful. We actually had noticed, you know, we asked the question certainly in our application, you know, because we don't want to get a sense of like, what is it about our mission or what are the things that students care about? We have noted a lot more interest in kind of in the social causes and concerns that students have and are sharing, and that they're not very that there's a lot of blending, there's a lot of intersectionality in the things that they care or the ways they identify and or have concern about, and that, you know, how they can connect that and then continue to sort of exercise and grow that while they're in college is really important to them. So it's just as important for us to find out from them, but they're also wanting to know that we can sort of deliver on our abilities to help them get there. So they're taking time to ask the questions very thoughtfully, sometimes and often with their parents too, but they're being very, very thoughtful, and sometimes they're needing a little more time to be able to do that, and that's fair.
That's great to know. Folks, any questions from fellow faculty or from the folks here in our Zoom room?
Have you tried any fun new social media trends this year? Like maybe any TikTok videos or Instagram?
New what we always try to freshen up with is really our students who we want to just as much make sure that students are getting to know our students. So we don't want to be front and center. Like I actually am very camera shy, typically like to be in front of the camera. But the students who are here, who are our ambassadors or leaders in different organizations, you know, when they wanting to sort of share out, and it's having this freshness of all these different personalities and experiences that they can share out, that I think is the most stickiest to students, because they want to connect with students who have similar interests or who they can feel just very comfortable with asking and relating to. So this year I wouldn't say we necessarily proliferated on the platforms as much as trying to provide just more depth and offering to the information. And that's true about also professors who are eager to share their programs or their classes and answer those questions. So that's, I think, served us really well.
So we won't be seeing you on TikTok then anytime soon, Eva.
Not me.
No.
Not, at least unbeknownst to me.
Awesome.
Hello.
Yay, go for it, Chief.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
I did have a question. When you brought up earlier about the drop off in math, I've seen a big drop off with my students, you know, who are doing my juniors who are doing virtual algebra 1, and then this year a lot of them are struggling in algebra 2 as juniors because they have that gap from geometry to algebra 2. Are you all cognizant of that when you're or how cognizant of that is Santa Clara when you're reviewing applications, if, you know, like math scores or
Yeah,
math grades aren't as what we want it to be?
yeah, we are, and in our holistic review, you know, it is the transcript that gives us the most complete information on the journey, right? So we don't necessarily just look at a cumulative GPA and okay, well, they have it above this or that. We're looking at the trends, and we're looking at the patterns and the sequence of math, and that they're, you know, that they're building upon them, because you're absolutely right. Math is one of those subjects that is their building blocks. And if you miss one, you know, building on top of that, it just snowballs. So, you know, we do see that some students have then had to circle back to either repeat that course, and that's okay, or fortify it over the summer with summer school or a community college course. And we advise that also to our students who, you know, have decided that they're going to come to Santa Clara, but, you know, there's just, there's no harm, and there's only benefit if you continue to fortify your math as a building block. We have a math requirement. It's a little more intense for those who are coming into engineering and or business, where calculus is an absolute. So, but, you know, students are getting there at kind of a different level. So we have had to expand our offerings even in pre-calculus, for example, which here at the time is not a transfer. It's not a math credit. It's an elective credit. So, but that is what we're communicating to students, is to you know, fortify that math, and it's, you know, it's tricky for some folks because that learning experience online wasn't helpful for a lot of folks. But if that means they have to like double up the course, that's okay. We actually replace that GPA or the grade when they repeat it. So we just eliminate a bad grade if they then repeat the course.
Okay, thank you. Is that standard, or is that
It's not standard necessarily, but so that is a good question to ask, you know, counselors, as just to get your understanding. But that's what we do here. So that's where, you know, answering your question, just we are cognizant of that, and we're trying to again really sort of lean into a better understanding, and also just you know, giving students the benefit, especially when they've done the work and are trying to, you know, reinforce what they know they lost.
Well, thank you so much. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
Yay. Thanks for being brave and asking a question. Love it. Continuing on with the trend of questions. I think we have time for maybe one more question, because we want to be respectful of your time. We know that it's busy, but any last questions that someone wanted to kind of chime in right now? Feel free to use the chat. Okay, well, I won't belabor the point. We know it's a busy time, and we are all just pushing through to graduation, and hopefully we will see you at Summer Institute as well, or New Counselor Workshop as well. We did want to just say thank you so much, Eva. We know you are very busy. We really appreciate your insights and all that you're sharing with us. Thank you again.
Oh, I'm happy to do it, and thank all of you, because we know you put in so much hard work, and you are also just such great resources to our students who need you. So thank you. It's not always easy, but really appreciate it, and your letters are really awesome and helpful.
Yay! Oh, that's a relief to hear, because you know everybody's been writing a storm.
I know.
Well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time here in May. We're going to end the webinar, and a recording will be sent shortly. Thank you again, Eva. Thank you again to the faculty. Thank you all for being here, and we will see you all next year if you're attending the webinar series.
Thank you. Bye. Enjoy summer.